Ladies and gentlemen, gamers everywhere, welcome to Rpgibberish, the podcast for RPG lovers, presented by RPG lovers. My name is Greg, and I go by the name of RPGSwagman on YouTube and around the online gaming community. And with me is my main co-host, Aerodynamic, as he goes by on YouTube. How you going?
Welcome everybody to indeed the first episode. I'm very happy to be here, of course, recording this podcast, RP Gibberish with RPG Swagman.
Yes, we've been meaning to do a podcast for a while now. Well, I've been meaning to do a podcast for a very, very long time. And a month ago, Arrow offered to co-host with me, and I couldn't have asked for anyone better because he certainly knows these RPGs quite in depth. I know he's a fan of a lot of companies, especially Square Enix. If you haven't already checked out his channel, he's also got a second channel called The Specialist. I really like his videos. He's got an amazing collection.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, I'm such a big collector of Square Enix over the years. Final Fantasy VII is probably their most recognizable game. It was my first ever RPG, and I've been collecting from them from the last year, and then it just evolved over time, and then I started importing, and it's working great so far, and I'm pretty much very happy with my collection. I just love Square Enix, even though their recent games might not be up to par from their earlier, especially the Squaresoft titles from around 2000, but it's such a fantastic, rich history, and I just love playing and collecting their games. But you yourself have a wonderful collection of RPGs as well. Especially a big fan of both Ys and Suikoden, which I'm also a big fan of, but tell a little bit more about that.
Yes. Good old Suikoden and Nice. They're two of a lot of RPG series that I really, really love to collect. Last year, which was the 15th anniversary of Gensu Suikoden, it seems that I was the only one that was excited for it, but I celebrated by adding to my collection a couple of years ago. I fulfilled my dream of owning one of every Suikoden game, and it was such a good feeling. But to celebrate the 15th anniversary, I decided to try my best to buy every version, every print of every Suikoden game happen. Unfortunately, I didn't get them all, but I did get quite a lot of games, and I've got to play different versions of other games. Like I got to play the Saturn version of Suikoden, which is very interesting, I got to say, even though my copy was a little bit damaged. So
That's very interesting. I for people who are also following my channel, I recently picked up a Sega Saturn, and of course I had to import a copy of Genso Suikoden as well. So I'll look forward to checking that out. Even though I'm not the best Japanese reader, I'll see if I can spot some differences between the PlayStation 1 version and the Saturn version. And that's definitely a very interesting piece of Genso Suikoden history, the Saturn version.
well, the good thing that goes with that is that was released a part of a set of games that Konami wanted to bring to the Saturn because it wasn't just Suikoden. They also brought out a copy of Vandal Hearts and, of course, the infamous copy of Castlevania Symphony of the Night, which had a few extras as well. So I think it was around that time in 1998 where Sega was trying to push sales of the Sega Saturn. Of course, they had their big ad campaign with Segata Santro, and a lot of people flocked to that, and including Konami. So
All right, that's definitely very interesting. I think it's time to move on to the very interesting question, and that's of course how did we start playing RPGs? I briefly mentioned this, of course, with Final Fantasy VII, but Greg, please tell us how you started with RPGs.
gladly. I started RPGs at a very young age, at about 6 years old. Now, I couldn't finish the games, but To me, watching my dad and my brother play RPGs was probably better than TV. I just was so interested in it. And the first game that got me interested in watching and playing a little bit of RPGs in the beginning was Sega's Fantasy Star for the Master System. And a magnificent game. It's just such a gorgeous game for the Master System. It's still my favorite game on that platform. And of course, it's the wonderful game that got me into RPGs. And if you know the history behind that game, it it has a wonderful story behind its development where they got every major programmer within Sega to work on that title because they wanted to throw their hat into the RPG race, which began with Dragon Quest and then was followed by Final Fantasy. One of the most interesting facts that no one ever knows is both Final Fantasy and Fantasy Star was released within a week of each other, which I always found to be really, really interesting indeed. I kind of like Fantasy Star because it just introduced to me that cinematic storytelling in games because a lot of people don't haven't played it and don't realize that for such a very old game made in the 80s, it does have a cinematic nature to it. Like, it's one of the first games I know to have cutscenes. Like, there'll be certain parts in the game where there'll be like a giant box and there'll be like one frame of animation and a little story behind it. And I really got sucked into it. And one of the other reasons why it was such a beautiful game is because all the enemies had beautiful, flawless animation for being a Master System game. Like every time they attacked, their whole body would move, their arms and everything. It was so realistic. And of course, you had the 3D dungeons just to add that more layer of depth. And it was a very challenging game. And or I should say, the worlds of Fantasy Star were fantastic. It was based off sci-fi and Greek mythology all into one, and absolutely lovely game. I just enjoyed it so much, and from there, I just got to play a lot of other RPGs on the Master System, like Miracle Warriors and Grovelius and Golden Axe Warrior. Just that's where I kind of begun playing RPGs. And for that time, going into the 90s, I was just under that impression that Sega was the best game makers. They made the best RPGs. At that time, I didn't know who Squaresoft was. I didn't know who ENIX was or anyone else that was making RPGs. It was just purely Sega. So when I went into the Mega Drive era, they were the games that I targeted. So that's kind of where my roots come from, is mainly Sega consoles. So that kind of where I learned to appreciate RPGs, and a lot has changed since then. And I'm very thankful for the times I've spent and played the games that I've picked up.
All right, that's definitely a very interesting story. I have to be honest and say that my first ever console that I had was a Sega Mega Drive as well. The downside of that is here in the Netherlands at that time, I believe it was around 1995, 96, when I was around 7, 8 years old. The Sega Mega Drive was pretty much already done and over with, so you wasn't able to buy a lot of games. And the sad thing with that is I picked up my system, or I got it from my birthday, of course, with a set amount of games. And in that period that I owned a Sega Mega Drive, I only ever got one extra game, and that was Sonic and Knuckles. And in all those games, there sadly was no RPG available. And I have to be honest and think, knowing myself, of course, that if I had a copy of probably Fantasy Star, I would have probably spent all my money and time in building this fantastic Fantasy Star collection instead of Final Fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just where you which games you had available to you. In your case, you started with Final Fantasy VII, as did a lot of people. That game kind of introduced the genre to a wider fan base, and that was all to do with clever marketing and just Squaresoft making such an amazing epic adventure, and it just blew out of proportion. It just suddenly became like I would say slightly more cool to play RPGs after Final Fantasy, because it was just at that time it was to most people, it was the thing to play. It was kind of like, if you want to be cool, you had to play it. But there'd be a handful of gamers like ourselves that would actually appreciate the game for what it was. And I too love Final Fantasy VII. I think it's a um, it is appreciated, but I know a lot of older fans starting to bag it, compare it to the other games, saying it's not aged well. Whereas I kind of disagree. I think it's one of the best games that has a timeless quality to it. So I always play Final Fantasy VII whenever I can. But getting back to what you said before with not being able to play RPGs on the Mega Drive, it was very interesting in the fact that back in those days, um, I would say, went back in the Master System and Mega Drive days, Sega didn't really have a target audience or different focus groups for their games. It wasn't separate genre groups back in those days. There was just one group, and that was gamers, and they just released everything. And that's kind of why I loved those days, the glory days, where they just didn't really care about what would sell, what would not. They would just take a chance, nevertheless, and just market the game out of there. Now, I can't really speak for the Netherlands. The only part of gaming culture there is through the stories you've told me. But here in Australia, I would say I was very lucky because I had all these video stores around me that basically stocked a lot of Master System and Mega Drive games. One of the stores I had and was friends with the owner, he had every Mega Drive RPG in that one store. So I was very, very thankful for him because I got to play all of them. I got to play even a lot of imports that didn't get the PAL. So the cool thing about the Mega Drive is I believe it was region free, so you can get Genesis cartridges and it would play. And he did import a lot of Genesis RPGs.
But yeah, let me continue my story with how I got into RPGs. This is back in around, say, 98, 99. Final Fantasy VII hit here in Europe, and a great group of friends of mine who are all brothers, they had a PlayStation 1, and myself included. And at that time, I was playing, Crash Bandicoot 2 and 3, which are amazing games. And then all of a sudden, it's around the summer vacation, Final Fantasy VII, I believe, just hit the greatest hits label, and they picked up a copy, and I went over their house and they booted up the game, and what I saw there is just amazing. I had seen almost never anything quite like it. The fact that it had CGI cutscenes, a storytelling, also very memorable characters. The opening sequence, in Midgar's reactor is just fantastic. And then when they came up, I already was engulfed in, the turn-based battle system. And then all of a sudden, you get to the Scorpion boss, and that just blew me away. I went home, just completely my mind blown. I said to my mother, please pick me up a copy of Final Fantasy VII. And I pestered her for probably a week or so, and luckily it was a greatest hit title, which probably at that time cost around 60 guilders, which is probably around 35 euros now. So pretty much the same price, inflation and such. But the bad part about that story is my mother, she picked up the copy, I believe, on a Friday. So I was really happy to play it. It was almost summer vacation. But the bad part is I got the game, but the next day, or even that same day, I had to go on a full week camp that was organized, through school. So I wasn't able to play, and I swear all the time during that vacation, it was a fun time, but all the while I was thinking of one thing: once I get home, I'm going to play Final Fantasy VII, and that's exactly the thing that I did, after a very long trip, back from one of the smaller islands here in the Netherlands. That's where we were staying. It probably took around 3 hours to get home. I just threw my bags on the ground, picked up the copy of Final Fantasy VII, hit up the TV, and started playing it. And it was just absolutely fantastic. And it's just a mind-blowing RPG. And I just really loved that time that I spent with it. But if I have to be honest, the same the same period of time, Final Fantasy VII was a greatest hits title. Final Fantasy VIII also came out, and one of those games was Final Fantasy VIII. So I played both games, pretty much back to back over the course, my first year of high school. I absolutely love both, but if I have to pick one, my vote would go to Final Fantasy VIII. Even though it isn't my first RPG ever, the thing with Final Fantasy VIII is just it connected with me a little bit more. The more realistic graphics, all the different side quests and such. And I'm definitely not hating on Final Fantasy VII, even though that's a very very popular thing to do nowadays. There are a lot of people out there hating on Final Fantasy VII just because it's such a landmark title, which I also agree that that game doesn't deserve that. But even though Final Fantasy VII is a landmark title, my thoughts go out a little bit more to Final Fantasy VIII. But both are fantastic games, and after that, I moved on to a lot of PlayStation RPGs. Not as much as you would think, uh, which we'll get to eventually. But yeah, that's pretty much my history with how I got into RPGs. It's regrettable that I didn't get in them sooner, but at least I did. And over the last 15 years or so, I've been enjoying RPGs a whole lot, and I'm still delving into a wonderful series, which again we'll talk about in a second.
There's a lot. What I want to add is there's a lot of in nowadays in 2011. There's just so many great companies with so many great IPs out there that they've created so many great fan bases that it's just wonderful to play these games and find out where they come from. Like I'm a big fan of all the bigger series. They're not like famous, but they have a lot of history behind them. And it's all to do because I've been playing RPGs probably my whole life, and I've been able to connect with one of the titles at one stage or another. Um, just want to add a bit more to how I kept going on with RPGs is after the Mega Drive, I used to hire out a Saturn, and that was fantastic for me because that was the first 3D console I played, and I remember playing Virtual Highlight, and I know a lot of people are just going to turn off after I say the word highlight, but um, Virtual Highlight, yeah, that's one game that has not aged well. But for the time when I was, I think about 10 years old, it was so fantastic to see their character walk in full 3D, in a free 60-degree angle. It was just so new to me. I remember the night when I hid out of sat and played that game, I was just so mesmerized. Like, this is the future of games. And basically what happened was is I couldn't afford a Sega Saturn. And what happened was we ended up getting a Mega CD for Shining Force CD, and the game didn't end up getting a release. Actually did get a release over here in Australia. It was just really low quantity, so I pretty much my dad spent $400 on nothing, and it's very unfortunate. But I will tell you about the fairy tale ending to that in another podcast. I was very happy to get a Super Nintendo, and I experienced a lot of great RPGs. Before Final Fantasy VII came out, I learned about Squaresoft through a wonderful, wonderful game called Secret of Mana, which I really want to talk about in such greater length in another podcast. But that was the first Squaresoft game I played, and whenever I think about the good times with the games that Squaresoft makes, I always think of Secret of Mana first up because it's such an amazing game. But I won't talk about all the games that I play on the Super Nintendo just for the intro episode. I'll talk about that at another date. But when I got to the PlayStation, um, like I said, I got to experience games like Suikoden. And when Final Fantasy VII came out, as I was talking about before, a lot of people viewed that as the revolution of gaming. Like, they have not played anything like that. But at that time, I would have had about 6 years worth of RPGs under my belt. So it wasn't new to me, but how the visual style and the CG and just the graphics and the character design and how the story was told, the game to me felt like an evolution of the genre more than a revolution to me. And I remember the day that I actually got it, I hid it out and I pulled open the case. And when I saw the free CDs, my reaction was priceless because I never played a multi formatted game before. I'm so used to the one cartridge or the one disc. So to have this game have showing free discs in front of my face, I don't know, I was just so excited. And uh like I said, I must have played that game, I think, about 3 times during 997. That's all I was doing, and I got to play every inch of that game. And I absolutely love it to death. And I appreciate what it did for the genre and for the gaming industry. It kind of taught a lot of people to up the ante when creating their game. And I'm very, very, very glad of its existence. And of course, I'm very glad that it succeeded because Squaresoft really did like Final Fantasy before it put everything into that production of the game. And I could have think if the game would have bombed, Square Enix wouldn't have existed. So it was a very scary thought, but I'm glad that it did work out and things have they've able to keep creating games from Final Fantasy VII, and they've created a lot of great games. But I've got to be honest as well. Square also makes a lot of bad games as well. That to me, I personally view them as the ultimate 50-50 company, where they make as many good titles as they make bad titles. But that's just one gamer's opinion, and I would personally like to hear all your opinions. One thing I just want to mention very quickly, if you want to comment on the podcast, leave us a message. We're going to upload this to YouTube. Am I correct, Arrow?
Yes, we have a YouTube channel for the Rpgibberish podcast, and whenever there's a new podcast out, I'll split them up in multiple episodes and release them within a day, so everybody can be able to enjoy them on YouTube as well. Please leave the comments there, of course, and if you have any questions, yeah, just PM us. But yes, we will upload all the episodes to YouTube as well. Definitely try to make sure that everybody is enjoying it, of course, because this podcast is, of course, made by fans of RPGs. Perhaps even fanatics, addicts of RPGs, but it's also for RPG fanatics. So you guys that are listening to this have to enjoy it as well.
Which leads us into the next segment that I want to share is how this podcast is going to be run. Basically, for this episode, we're just going to introduce ourselves and later on talk about the games we're playing. But from here on out, we're actually going to talk about a certain series or a certain game for each episode. And we're also going to try and get another guest on who is kind of an expert or a passionate fan of that particular game or series or even the company. There'll be some episodes where we'll talk about company because they may make some very unusual one-off games, so we can compile it all in just a one discussion. We have a few people lined up, and it'll be very, very interesting. But just to let you know, you don't need to be like a expert. You don't have to work in the industry. Anyone can come on this podcast. If you especially have a series that you love, let us know. Hit us a message. We'll definitely respond to it. We'll get to know you. I personally love to talk to new RPG fans, and this year being on YouTube, I've met some awesome people who have some awesome tastes in RPGs, and I love meeting those people who have a certain expertise in a certain game. Like, everyone on YouTube refers to me as the guy as the guy who basically knows a lot of Gensu Suikoden and Ys and Falcom and all that. And later on, we might find a guy that might be into, say, Breath of Fire series, or another guy that probably likes Pokemon of all things, you know. We were up for different topics of all kinds, so that's how it's going to be structured. But I'm not going to take the spotlight all the time. There may be one game that I want to talk about one week, and then the next week I'll give it over to Aero. He'll bring up a game he wants to talk about. And I'm very sure there's going to be, most weeks, there's going to be a game we've both played, and we'll provide both our expertise on it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a very interesting structure, and that's definitely something that we're going to try and do for each episode. You know, just focus on a specific company or series. And that's honestly the way I collect myself. The way I have my collection set up is based into focus collections. And so that's definitely a very interesting format. You know, what else is going to be happening on this podcast is we are going, of course, taking questions. So, like we said before, if you have questions, probably at the end of the video, we'll answer some of these questions on the podcast live. So, definitely see the response there instead of just a text reply. Another very interesting thing on this podcast is we are going to be challenging ourselves. We all love RPGs, and there's a huge list of RPGs available for play. And me personally, I haven't delved into a lot of RPG series as much as I want to. And the main reason for this podcast and what we like to call the challenge is we're basically going to be offering each other a choice of 3 games where we each can pick which game to play. You know, we're going to give it a try, of course, if that's reasonable and we're able to locate the games for ourselves. We are not millionaires, and we can't buy everything.
No.
So yeah, that's another very interesting thing, you know. And then the next week, we'll quickly do a recap on the challenge. You know, of course they are RPGs. Sometimes we are not able to finish the challenge game within a week. You know, we have lives ourselves, but we'll definitely. It's going to be very interesting, and I'm going to announce here, and Greg doesn't even have to mention it. The first game that I'll be taking as a challenge will be the original Phantasy Star on the Master System, because I have never played it, and I feel very bad for it. So I'm going to be playing Phantasy Star, and I'll see how much I love it.
Excellent work. I really hope you enjoy it. I'm going to be very interested to see how your thoughts on it. I will definitely have to pick a game that I have never played before. I actually have some ideas. You know what? because I'll talk about the games I'm currently playing right now, but for the weekly challenge, I am going to pick, and this has been a while now since I wanted to play this, I'm going to pick Mother
Ooh.
on the NES. I've always wanted to get into Earthbound, and I've heard a lot of people really hail that as the holy grail of the Super Nintendo. But of course, that never got released in PAL, so I never really knew the series until after I got a computer and learned about the series. And I've looked at Mother 1, I've looked at Earthbound, and I've looked at Mother 3, but Mother 1 looks interesting. Of course, they got renamed as Earthbound 0 for the fan translation, but I've seen a few videos on that, and I'm kind of interested, so I'm going to spend next week playing some Mother 1 and see how far I can get it, and I'll just provide my thoughts. But it's a pretty kooky game, so I'm very interested in having a go.
That's very awesome. It's very funny that you bring that up, because only a year ago I finally delved into Earthbound Mother 2 on the SNES. I absolutely love playing through it. I believe it's one of the best SNES RPGs out there. But I have to be honest and say that I have not yet played Mother 1, Earthbound 0, as well as Mother 3 on the Game Boy Advance. They for a very long time, but I just haven't been able to delve into it. And I very much look forward how your weekly challenge went. And hopefully you're able to persuade me to bump it up my priority list and make sure that I play it as well. One advice that I'm going to give you if you're going to be playing Mother Earthbound Zero, I believe there's a small patch out there that will increase the experience that you gain from each fight, which will keep you a little bit sane from what I've read from the fan translators who got absolutely crazy from the low experience rate. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, definitely. I'll keep that in mind. But yeah, one thing that I always will try as well is I always try to get copies of these games for my collection because I love collecting Japanese RPGs, and I probably will get a copy of Mother for my shelf. So that's definitely in the cards. And I know for a fact that game got re-released on, I believe, the Game Boy Advance as well, to get doing under a pack of Mother 1 and 2.
That's indeed correct. Yeah, it got released for the upcoming Mother 3 release. Sadly, my collection so far only allows me to own a copy of Mother 2. We will definitely, once we are more advanced into Mother series, I have a very interesting story to tell about Earthbound. Very regrettable story, but so far I only own Mother 2, and I've always been looking for a copy of Mother 1 and Mother 3. But they are definitely amongst some of the rarer and more expensive Japanese RPGs to get. So, but we'll see how it goes. Definitely going to try and play Mother 1 at some point, but for now it remains Greg's challenge for the week, and mine will be Fantasy Star.
All right, for this next segment, we're going to be talking about the RPGs we have been playing lately. And I'm going to give it over to Aero. So take it away. What have you been playing lately?
Yes, and that's very interesting that you say, because in terms of games that I've been playing, I have been going on a fantastic role playing game binge for the last couple of months. I have to say and say quickly that from September 2010 all the way up to March or April 2011, I had not touched any RPG, and that just put me in a really bad mood at some point where I just said I'm going to play some more and new RPGs. My life was really hectic at the time, but I'm very very happy and blessed that I'm back into the RPG world, and I've been playing a lot of fantastic games already through some great recommendations from Greg as well. And the main games that I'm currently playing and very invested in are the Nihon Falcon games. A month ago, I already wrapped up Legend of Hero Trails in the Sky, which is absolutely fantastic. But we'll probably get to that at some point in the podcasts. But for now, I'm playing the E series. It's a series that I'd never played before. I heard a lot of people talk about, of course, Greg here, and of course Happy Console Gamer. Taylor from the Muragaru 553 channel are huge Ys fans, and I loved watching their videos. And now I finally delved into the PlayStation Portable remakes of Ys 1 and 2 Chronicles that are wrapped up today. And this weekend I will be delving into Ys The Oath in Felghana, which is the third game, a remake reboot. And so far I'm absolutely loving it. I'm more of a turn-based RPG gamer, but in terms of Ys, it's just fantastic. Um, Ys, of course, is a great action RPG that draws a lot of similarities to the Legend of Zelda series. And while I struggle myself, with playing a lot of Legend of Zelda, it's not one of my favorite series by a long shot. I feel that Ys does everything right on each level. At least the PlayStation Portable versions are just fantastic. Graphics are top notch. I don't even want to start on the soundtracks, which are probably some of the best on any system.
That's the power of Falcom right there. They make the best music ever. I'm a big fan of the sound team, which is Falcom GDK, and they've also got a band called Falcom Band GDK where they play these games at yearly concerts. And I got to watch their concert last year, and it just blew the friggin' house down. Absolutely awesome. But I'm very, very happy that you're able to appreciate the music. It's not hard when you play a Falcon game. You just lose yourself in the soundtrack, just straight away from the get go.
Oh yeah, definitely. So yeah, I'm just loving the E series. It just feels absolutely right. You know, it is very difficult, but with a lot of trial and error, you're able to get through it. I'm playing them on the normal difficulty so far. For now I have no interest in trying it at hard because at several boss fights I was definitely tearing my almost tearing my hair out. But wonderful games. I just love them. And originally I just only wanted to play East One and Two Chronicles. And then just move on to a different series because I have such a huge RPG backlog. It's crazy, but I got so invested in it that I just really wanted to move on to Oath in Felghana, and I already feel that I'm probably going to move on to E7. Besides East, I've also delved into a very classic series, if not the most classic series of all time, and that is the Dragon Quest series. A small backstory of me and Dragon Quest. I love the series. I about 2 years ago I played Dragon Quest 4 for the first time, and earlier this year I finished Dragon Quest 9. Fantastic RPGs, but of course with the upcoming 25th anniversary of Dragon Quest, I just knew I had to sit down and play the original trilogy, the so-called Lodo or Edric trilogy, and I'm currently up on the second game, which is again really mind-blowingly difficult, and it's just so. It's a very interesting, start of the most iconic RPG series in Japan. And while I do have some issues with the games, they are still fantastic classics, and I still very much enjoy them. And I hope and I know that from the first two games they can only get better. I very much look forward to playing Dragon Quest 3, which I hear is on a lot of favorites lists. How about you, Greg? How does Dragon Quest 3 rank on your Dragon Quest list?
Funny enough, I really like Dragon Quest 3, but I got sidetracked with other series I loved. But Dragon Quest, for all of you out there, is very high on my favorites list. Like it's one of my top 10 favorite RPG lists of all time, and I'm very very excited for the 25th anniversary of the series this year. Uh, just a little backstory how I got into Dragon Quest is the first official Power Dragon Quest was Dragon Quest 8 on the PS2, and I remember getting that game. I bought it day one and I popped it in, and it's one of those games where you just lose track of time and everything around you because you're just so entranced by how the game is. It's just one of the most gorgeous games that's ever been created in gaming history, and it's actually my favorite PS2 RPG of all time. And to even more that, if you want to know how much I love that game, I think within 5 hours, I'm a big con goer. I love anime, and I like going to expos to talk to other anime fans and everything. And if you are curious, I actually was kind of still am a cosplayer. And I remember 5 hours into playing the game, I asked my sister if she could make me the Dragon Quest Heroes uh, uniform, basically. Just don't know his outfit, and I basically went to the con and everyone was screaming at me because that was the game that everyone was playing at that time. And I could talk about Dragon Quest 8 till fucking dusk till dawn because I absolutely love that game. But just give you a quick brief on my thoughts with the series leading up to playing 1 and 2. I got to play the second Dragon Quest game I played was Dragon Quest 4 on the DS. I absolutely love that game. I love the characters and I love the structure of the game, how it tells. Uh, each chapter is one of the different characters and how they all meet up in the final chapter. I just really loved that. And then I played Dragon Quest V, and a lot of fans will tell you that it tugs at the heartstrings because it's just such a really amazing story. And then after that, I actually got a hold of 1 and 2, and to tell you the truth, a lot of people can get turned off with the simplicity of one. However, I look at it as the great granddaddy of Japanese RPGs, and I know it's going to be. When I went into playing the game, I knew it was going to be the most simplistic RPG I could ever play. But that's where its charm lies because it wasn't that difficult, and it was so odd because it was a game that used a very basic turn-based battle system, but yet there was only one character throughout the entire game. And I always felt that that was very odd, but at the same time, I thought to myself, hey, this is the first traditional RPG made there. Um, you know, back then it wasn't even thought of to have extra party members. But in Dragon Quest 2, they rectified that and gave an extra 2 party members. But one thing I just want to answer to Arrow is yes, Dragon Quest 2 is really difficult. I found that game to be extremely challenging, especially towards the end where it really did make me want to bash my head against the wall as hard as I possibly could, because to beat the end boss of that game, you would have to spend weeks, no, probably even months grinding to beat it. And yeah, but I managed it. But yeah, but getting back to it, yeah, the Dragon Quest games, they're just amazing. And I want to talk about why they're so popular in Japan in another episode, because the story of how that game is created is actually one of my favorite gaming production stories of all time. But I'll definitely leave that for another episode.
All right, yeah, that's something to look forward to. You know, the Dragon Warrior 2 boss, Dragon Quest 2 boss. That's very interesting. And I'm still playing it. You know, I only recruited the second character for now, but I'm very interested to see how far I go. Yeah, that's pretty much from what I've been playing so far. Am I forgetting anything? You know, I'm playing East. I'm playing Dragon Quest. Soon, of course, I'll start into Fantasy Star. And I believe that about wraps it up for my games I'm playing. You know, I finished a lot of great RPGs earlier, a couple of weeks ago. And for now, it's just delving into old series. And I think Fantasy Star will definitely complement that. And I believe the biggest game that I'm anticipating, or at least 2 games at the moment, but sadly they haven't been released yet, are both Catherine, which is a semi-RPG, of course made by a fantastic RPG developer called Atlas, even though it's technically a puzzle game, and of course Xenoblade Chronicles, which will soon hit in a couple of weeks. But yeah, for now, I will stick to the E series, stick to the Dragon Quest series and the Fantasy Star series, and catch up. You know, these games were out for 20 years or already, and I'm just playing catch up. So delving into a lot of history, and I'm absolutely loving it so far. And after that, we are going to move right up to some current gen RPGs that are going to be released in a couple of weeks. So that's it for my games I've been playing. But how about you, Greg? I know some of the games you'll be playing. Please share us your stories.
Well, first before I talk about the games I've been playing, it's very cool that all the RPGs that Aero's playing right now are all the ones that are the ones I hold in the highest regards, and I know he listens to my opinions he speaks them very highly. So what I'm going to do, and I've always done, is I always ask him for games that I have not played yet, and I I have been told that I should revoke my RPG loving license when I told him that I did not play the World Ends With You on the DS. So that's actually another that is another on my high priority list to play, because it's not just from Arrow. It has been from a lot of people that they're very shocked when I tell them that. So I will definitely have to play When the World Ends With You.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of my favorite Nintendo DS titles. We'll probably get to it once you play it and have a discussion on that. But it used to be my favorite Nintendo DS game. It was the first RPG that I absolutely loved on the Nintendo DS. Sadly, earlier this year, I had to say goodbye to the number 1 spot for The World Ends With You and had to change it up with a different game that's not even an RPG, but that's the wonderful 999, 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors. And even though that's not an RPG, it just edges out over The World Ends With You. But The World Ends With You is still the best RPG on the Nintendo DS for sure. But that's just my opinion. I know a lot of people share that, and there are so many wonderful RPGs, but I definitely hope that you're able to get your hands on The World Ends With You and love its unique gameplay, its presentation, and its story. All fits really well together, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts on the game.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna uh, just look into that just a lot more. But getting into the games I've been playing recently, well, I haven't been playing many games recently because I've only been playing one, I should say, scenarios of this one game that I've waited 14 years to play. It's very tragic that these games did not come out when they did back in the day. They did in Japan, but they didn't. This, of course, is the wonderful Shining Force 3 by Sega and Camelot. Now, what's really unique about this game is, well, one, I've been with the Shining Force series since Shining Force 2, and I still regard it as one of my favorite RPGs of all time. I lost many, many days in 1994 just playing the heck out of Shining Force 2. But getting back into Shining Force 3, I remember going into the news agency, which is a place that sells the newspapers and magazines and all that. And I remember going into there, and that was my only source of gaming news because this was before the internet became popular in Australia. And I used to basically go up to the magazines, flip through them, and I remember seeing Shining Force 3, and I got so excited. It was the only game I wanted to play. Unfortunately, with Shining Force 3, it was very common to find it in Japan, of course, but it had a limited release in America and it had a very limited release in PAL to the point that there was hardly any copies that got shipped to Australia. So at that point, I missed out on Shining Force CD and Shining Force 3, which was very sad, but I actually got a hold of Shining Force CD. I'd say a decade later, and I was very happy to get it. And now I've had the opportunity to finally play Shining Force 3. What happened was is I bought these copies for my brother because he's the biggest Shining Force fan I know, and he really loves those games. And he did me a favor where he brought me a copy of Suikoden 3 for my Suikoden collection. So I've always wanted to pay him back for that. So one Christmas, I went on eBay and I got him all three scenarios of Shining Force 3. And recently he said to me that he wanted me to actually finally play them. And I've only just now got a new Sega Saturn. I found my old action replay card and I've gotten to work flawlessly. And that's all I've been playing. And if you're wondering how long these games are, well, there's three scenarios in all, and they run for about 30 to 40 hours a piece. So it's quite a lengthy undertaking to play all three games in succession, but that's all I've been doing in June and into July. I just beat Scenario 2 2 days ago, and it was such a good feeling. But just want to touch upon why the game is fantastic is it's one of the best cinematic strategy RPGs. It's very simple. Probably one of the reasons why the mechanics of the game is simple because the guys who run Camelot and are the directors of the Shining Force series were actual programmers on Dragon Quest 1, 2, and I believe 3. So after they finished working on Dragon Quest, they kind of left ENIX and they went to make their own studio, which was, I think, Sonic Software Planning, which was a subsidiary of Sega. But with the problems they were facing with Sega, they tried to branch off and then they made Camelot. And Shining Force 3 was one of the first games made under the Camelot name. And one of the things that I really like what they did with the story is between scenario 1 and scenario 2, it's the same time frame, but it's told from two different perspectives. Now, I'm not going to spoil the game, but one thing I find really cool, and some people find really irritating, and these are most of the people that just played the English version and not knowing about the other scenarios, is a lot of complaints was that the final boss didn't have enough story. There wasn't enough development for that character. And a lot of people just felt it came out left field and they felt alienated. Well, what's brilliant about that is when you play scenario 2, you can't, stop seeing that character. You see a lot of that character and see what happens behind the scenes, and it really adds a lot for his character. And I kind of compare it to Pulp Fiction, the wonderful movie by Quentin Tarantino. How that movie is told, where certain characters, I'm not gonna spoil the game, but I'll spoil Pulp Fiction. There's that scene where John Travolta dies, but then in the next scene, it goes back to when he was alive, and that's how I kind of feel with Shining Force. Um, how the story is told, and it's told by the perspective of three main characters, and it's definitely one of the best stories I've ever witnessed in a game. And I just like how it connects the dots. Like, there'll be some questions left unanswered in scenario one that gets answered in scenario two, and works itself up to the finale in scenario three, which is the game I'm currently undertaking. And oh boy, is it way more difficult than the other scenarios. But I absolutely love the games, and I plan on doing a video on them in the future on my channel, RPGSwagman, so look out for that. But other than Shining Force 3, I actually played a game just before we started this recording, and one of the games I bought this month was Muramasa, the Demon Blade for the Wii, because one of the companies I've been very interested in of late is Vanillaware. They make these very beautifully artistic 2D side-scrolling action RPGs, and I put in Muramasa, and I thought it's such a fun game. Like most Vanillaware games, the controls are very intricate. It takes a while to get used to them, but even though I was button mashing, I had a lot of fun. Absolutely beautiful. I love the artwork, but not giving any bad credit to Odin Sphere, I'm kind of more drawn to Muramasa than I was Odin Sphere. So I'm looking forward to playing that when I can. I dare say I'm probably going to put it down for now so I can keep focusing on Shining Force 3 and now focusing on Mother. So that's pretty much what I've been playing this week. And for the games I'm looking forward to, well, Aero just mentioned one of them, and that is Xenoblade Chronicles. And I've been talking about that game all year, and I've even campaigned a bit. I've talked to everyone about it, and I got to thank my good friend Taylor for introducing that game to me, because it's just the number one game I'm looking forward to playing. And next week I'm going to put in my pre-order, and I just can't wait till mid-August where I can finally play it. If you want to know how excited for the game I am, I bought a new Wii because my old one broke. I bought a new Wii just to play Xenoblade Chronicles.
All right, that's fantastic. I'm very psyched for Xenoblade Chronicles as well, but just buying an entire new system for it, that's some dedication. Of course, I hope that we also get the other games, Pandora's Tower and The Last Story. But Xenoblade is high on my list, and I can't wait to play it. And we'll surely do a big first impressions episode on RPG Gibberish. So that pretty much round out what you've been playing?
Yes. That's all. Like I said, I've only been focusing on Shining Force 3. And as much as I love every second of that game, I'm kind of also looking forward to finishing it and then branching off to play other RPGs.
All right. That's awesome. And a quick mention though, I have to say, Muramasa, I'm a huge Vanillaware fan as well, but I have to play Muramasa as well. I only put in an hour time. I loved it, but I have yet to go back to it. But we'll also do a huge Vanillaware episode, of course, because it's a very interesting company with a lot of interesting history and some great games and a fantastic presentation. So at some point we'll have a Vanillaware retrospective and episode. So let's see. Yeah, I think that about wraps up this first pilot episode, or the first episode of RPG Gibberish. We talked about a lot of interesting topics, the games that we've been playing, how we got into RPGs, and of course the ideas for the podcast.
Yeah, just one thing we're just looking forward to is connecting with the RPG community just that little bit more. I know that Aero and we connect with a lot of RPG fans for our YouTube channels and on various forums and streams, but we thought we would do have this idea so we can have a serious in-depth discussion and share our ideas and thoughts and talk about these wonderful games and hopefully give you a sense and maybe give you a interest in these games. And that's what I'm looking forward to doing on these podcasts. And if you're going to say, if we're going to, I know a lot of people like podcasts where people line up and joke around. You got to remember this is like the first episode ever. We're just getting our bearings, and as we're going to get into it very more, I know we're going to be much more relaxed, and we're going to, I know it'll be a lot more fun. I know that I'm going to try and make things a lot more fun, and so will Aero. So definitely stay tuned. I know we're going to have a lot of fun times ahead.
Oh yeah, definitely. At some point, we'll definitely feel more at ease, more relaxed, and of course, it's a learning process for the podcast. I don't really have a lot of experience with this, but we'll grow and we'll learn, and of course, we will add in a lot of jokes and interesting stuff, of course. But we definitely have to say, this podcast is definitely its main purpose is to recommend, and share wonderful stories, but definitely recommend a lot of RPGs out there. So if you're looking, for the next podcast, it's just indeed just an hour long, non-stop messing around. This might not be the best podcast for you. This is definitely more focused on the information about games, with a little bit of interesting stuff added in, of course. But we'll of course have a lot of great guest hosts who also bring something new to the table. So hopefully everybody is very psyched for the upcoming episodes, and please give us your feedback on the first episode of Rpgibberish. Let us know what we can improve, what we can change, and hopefully it will definitely be a great learning experience that everybody follows along the paths. And at some point we hit landmark episodes like the 10th episode, 50th episode, and who knows beyond that. So yeah. That's about it for me. You got anything else to say, Greg?
Well, like I said, guys, thank you for tuning in to the first episode of Rpgibberish. I know I've had this idea for a long time. I should thank my good friend Mike for bringing it to fruition, because I kind of put it on hold for a while. I did attempt it at one stage, but it didn't kind of work out, so I kind of put it on the back burner. But one day Mike offered to co-host and I couldn't refuse, so I'm very glad that we're able to get together and finally record an episode. But like I said, we welcome any RPG fan to the podcast, and we already have a lot of friends who are who have very passionate about certain series, a lot of good friends here on YouTube, and we've already talked to a couple of them, and they will be coming on, and I really look forward to those episodes. I won't announce what we've got planned, but we will when we have confirmed that they will come on and discuss them with us. But that's pretty much it for this first pilot episode. And again, I would like to thank Mike for co-hosting.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very happy with this podcast idea. I think it's a very good idea to have two main hosts who know a lot about RPGs. Absolutely love the genre. I'm a huge fan of games, of course, and have a lot of knowledge, and now I'm able to share it. And I think we complement each other very well in terms of our knowledge of certain series and our love for gaming, and I'm very psyched. We have indeed a lot of great ideas planned, and I honestly can't wait, for the upcoming episodes, and of course reading everybody's feedback and support. And so yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say for this first episode. For introducing the idea, Greg, please close off the podcast and put a wrap on the first ever Rpgibberish pilot episode.
Well, that's it for the pilot episode of Rpgibberish. If you wish to watch our videos where we give reviews on RPGs and we do a lot of collecting videos of RPGs, you can check out my channel, which is RPGSwagman on YouTube, and Mike's channel is Aerodynamisch. And we will provide links to our channels down below. And I'll provide the links on the website where the podcast will be uploaded. But for now, thank you for listening, and Take care.